We're just days away from reaching 1,000 subscribers. If we hit this goal in the next 15 days, we'll be able to keep the channel running and continue bringing you these stories. Your subscription makes all the difference. It's quick and helps us enormously. The Pirate's Protection. Chapter 1. The Captive Governess. The Merchant Vessel. Lady Margaret wallowed helplessly in the Caribbean swells, her mainmast shattered and her sails hanging in tatters. The notorious pirate ship, Crimson Revenge, had appeared on the horizon at dawn like a harbinger of doom, her black flag with its distinctive blood-red skull striking terror into the hearts of passengers and crew alike. Captain Nathaniel Black Hawk Thorne was feared throughout the Caribbean not only for his ruthless efficiency in battle, but for his strange code of honor that made him unpredictable even to his own men. As the pirates swarmed aboard the captured vessel, passengers huddled together in terror, clutching their valuables and praying for mercy. Among them stood Miss Eleanor Ashford, 24 years old, recently employed as governess to the wealthy Pemberton family's 3 children. She had been traveling from England to their plantation in Jamaica when fate had placed her directly in the path of the most feared pirate captain in the West Indies. Eleanor tried to make herself invisible among the other passengers, her modest grey dress and simple bonnet marking her clearly as a woman of modest means. Unlike the elaborately dressed plantation wives who wailed and fainted at the sight of the pirates, she stood quietly with her hands clasped, her green eyes alert and watchful, despite the fear that coursed through her veins. Captain Thorne strode across the deck with the confident swagger that had made him legend. At 35, he was tall and powerfully built, his dark hair tied back with a leather cord, a wicked scar running from his left temple to his jaw. His coat of midnight blue was trimmed with gold braid taken from some long-dead naval officer, and twin pistols gleamed at his sides. But it was his eyes that truly marked him as dangerous. Steel grey and utterly cold, they seemed to see everything and spare nothing. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced in a voice that carried easily across the deck, "I am Captain Thorne of the Crimson Revenge. Your ship is now mine, but your lives need not be forfeit if you cooperate. Surrender your valuables willingly, and you'll be set ashore unharmed at the next port." The passengers began frantically pulling rings from their fingers and watches from their pockets, anything to appease these feared men of the sea. Eleanor had little to offer, a simple silver locket that had been her mother's, and the few coins that represented her entire savings. As Captain Thorne's gaze swept over the assembled captives, it lingered on Eleanor for a moment longer than the others. There was something about her composure that intrigued him. While other women her age were sobbing or fainting, she faced the situation with remarkable courage, though he could see her hands trembling slightly. "You there," he said, pointing directly at her. "Step forward." Eleanor's heart hammered against her ribs, but she moved forward with dignity intact. "Yes, Captain? Your name, miss?" "Eleanor Ashford, sir. I'm a governess traveling to take employment in Jamaica." A governess. His eyes studied her more carefully now, taking in her simple attire and the intelligent alertness in her gaze. "And what valuable lessons do you teach, Miss Ashford?" "Reading, writing, arithmetic, French, and music. Sir, nothing that would interest a gentleman of your profession." A ghost of a smile played at the corner of his mouth at her careful choice of words. "You'd be surprised what interests me, miss. But for now, you may return to the others." As Eleanor stepped back, the wind caught her bonnet and blew it from her head. She reached up quickly to catch it, and as she did, the sleeve of her dress rode up, revealing her left wrist and forearm. Captain Thorne's expression changed instantly from mild amusement to something far darker. Circling her wrist were the clear marks of rough rope, angry red welts that spoke of being bound tightly for an extended period. Above them, on her forearm, were bruises in the distinctive pattern of finger marks, as if someone had gripped her with brutal force. "Miss Ashford." Captain Thorne's voice had dropped to a dangerous whisper that made his crew step back involuntarily. "A word with you, privately." He gestured toward the ship's rail, away from the other passengers. Eleanor followed reluctantly, her mind racing. Had he noticed her injuries? What would a pirate captain want with such knowledge? "Those marks on your arm," he said without preamble. "How did you come by them?" Eleanor instinctively pulled her sleeves down further, her cheeks burning with shame. It's nothing, Captain. An accident." "An accident?" His grey eyes bored into hers. "Miss Ashford, I've sailed these seas for 15 years. I know the difference between rope burns from a shipboard accident and the marks left by deliberate restraint. I also know finger bruises when I see them. Who hurt you?" "Please, sir, it's not your concern. Everything that happens on my ship is my concern." His voice carried the steel of absolute authority. "Now answer the question. Who hurt you?" Eleanor's composure finally cracked slightly, tears gathering in her eyes. "Mr. Pemberton, sir, the gentleman whose children I was engaged to teach. During the voyage, he made improper advances. When I refused, he became violent. He had me tied in the ship's hold for 2 days as punishment for my impertinence." Captain Thorne went very still, a stillness that his crew had learned to fear more than his rage. When he spoke, his voice was soft but deadly. "Where is Mr. Pemberton now?" "Below deck, sir. Hiding in his cabin, I believe." The captain turned to his quartermaster, a grizzled man named Tobias, who had sailed with him for a decade. "Tobias, find Mr. Pemberton. Bring him to me. Now." "Aye, Captain." Tobias hurried away, recognizing the tone that meant someone was about to face the captain's particular brand of justice. "Captain Thorne," Eleanor said urgently, "please, I don't want any trouble. I just want to reach Jamaica and begin my employment." "Your employment? With the man who brutalized you?" The captain's laugh was harsh and bitter. "Miss Ashford, you have a curious definition of employment if it includes being bound and beaten for defending your virtue. But I have nowhere else to go, sir. This position was arranged through an agency in London. Without it, I have no means of support." Captain Thorne studied her face, seeing the quiet desperation beneath her brave exterior. Here was a woman of education and dignity, trapped by circumstances into accepting abuse from those who should have protected her. It stirred something in him that he had thought long dead. "Miss Ashford," he said quietly, "you are no longer employed by Mr. Pemberton." Before she could protest, Tobias returned, dragging a portly man in expensive clothes who was blubbering with terror. Mr. Pemberton was everything Captain Thorne despised, a man who used his wealth and position to prey upon those weaker than himself. "Is this the gentleman?" the captain asked Eleanor. She nodded reluctantly. "Yes, sir, that's Mr. Pemberton." What Captain Thorne did next would become legend among pirate crews throughout the Caribbean. A story told in hushed whispers of what happened when someone crossed a line that even the most ruthless pirate would not tolerate. Chapter 2. A Pirate's Justice. Mr. Reginald Pemberton had built his fortune on sugar plantations worked by enslaved hands and a network of business dealings that skirted the edges of legality. A man of 52 with soft hands and a softer conscience, he was accustomed to having his way in all things, particularly with those he considered beneath his social station. The idea that anyone, let alone a pirate, would dare question his treatment of a mere governess was so foreign to him that he could barely comprehend what was happening. "You there," Captain Thorne addressed him with the cold courtesy that his crew knew preceded violence. "Mr. Pemberton, I believe. I understand you've been educating Miss Ashford in the duties of her position. Yes, that is, Pemberton stammered, sweat beading on his forehead despite the Caribbean breeze. She is my employee, sir. How I manage my household staff is hardly the concern of a pirate. Nathaniel's smile was sharp as a blade. You're quite right, Mr. Pemberton. Normally, the domestic arrangements of passengers are of no interest to me. However, when those arrangements involve tying up defenseless women and leaving bruises on them, they become very much my concern. The other passengers had fallen silent, straining to hear this unexpected exchange. Eleanor stood frozen, horrified that her private shame was being aired so publicly, yet strangely grateful that someone, even a pirate, was calling her abuser to account. Now then, Captain Thorne continued, beginning to pace around the trembling merchant like a shark circling its prey, perhaps you'd like to explain to me exactly what household duties required Miss Ashford to be bound with rope for 2 days. She was impertinent, disobedient. I had every right to discipline. The word cracked like a whip from the captain's lips. And what form did this discipline take? Mr. Pemberton glanced around desperately, seeing no sympathy in the hard faces of the pirates, no support from his fellow passengers, who had turned away in embarrassment and fear. She refused to. That is, she would not submit to. I merely sought to correct her attitude. Her attitude. Captain Thorne stopped directly in front of the man, his grey eyes holding all the warmth of a winter sea. Mr. Pemberton, I'm going to ask you one more time, and I suggest you answer truthfully. What exactly did you do to Miss Ashford? The silence stretched taut as a sail in a storm wind. Eleanor found herself holding her breath, amazed that this fearsome pirate captain was demanding justice on her behalf when her own countrymen had turned a blind eye to her suffering. She refused my advances, Pemberton finally whispered. I thought perhaps some time alone would help her reconsider her position. Ah, Captain Thorne nodded, as if this explained everything. So you forced yourself upon a woman under your protection, and when she quite rightfully refused, you had her tied up in a ship's hold like cargo. Is that an accurate summary? She is merely a governess, a servant. Surely her virtue is not worth... He never finished the sentence. Captain Thorne's fist connected with his jaw with a sound like breaking timber, sending the merchant sprawling across the deck. The watching passengers gasped, and even some of the pirates looked surprised at their captain's sudden violence. "Tobias," the captain called without taking his eyes off the groaning Pemberton. "Bring rope. The good hemp rope, mind you. We wouldn't want Mr. Pemberton to be uncomfortable." "Aye, Captain." Tobias grinned wickedly as he hurried to comply. "Captain Thorne." Eleanor stepped forward, her voice barely above a whisper. "Please, sir, I don't want you to commit violence on my account." He turned to her, and for a moment his harsh expression softened. "Miss Ashford, violence has already been committed. The only question now is whether it will go unpunished." "But he's not worth..." "You are." The simple statement, delivered with quiet conviction, hit her with more force than any flowery speech. Every woman is worth protecting from men like him. Tobias returned with the rope, and at a gesture from his captain, he and 2 other pirates hauled the dazed Pemberton to his feet. Captain Thorne took the rope in his hands, testing its strength. "Mr. Pemberton," he said conversationally, "I'm going to give you a lesson in discipline. Perhaps it will help you develop a better attitude." What followed was methodical and terrifying in its precision. Captain Thorne bound the merchant's hands behind his back with the same thoroughness that Pemberton had ordered for Eleanor, then had him tied to the mainmast under the blazing Caribbean sun. "You'll remain here," the captain informed him, "until I decide you've learned proper respect for women under your protection. Water will be provided, of course. I'm not a savage, but you'll have time to contemplate whether a governess's virtue is worth defending. You cannot do this, Pemberton raged, pulling against his bonds. I am an Englishman. I have rights. I'll see you hanged for this. An Englishman. Captain Thorne's laugh was devoid of humour. Yes, I can see how well that served Miss Ashford. Your fellow Englishmen were so concerned with her welfare that they allowed her to be brutalized for days without intervention. He turned to address his crew, his voice carrying easily across both ships. Let this serve as notice to all aboard. Any man who forces himself upon a woman, who uses his position to abuse those weaker than himself, will answer to me personally. I don't care if he's a duke or a ditch digger. Aboard my ship, such behavior will not be tolerated. The pirates nodded their agreement, though Eleanor caught several exchanging glances she couldn't interpret. This was a side of their captain they had never seen before, and it was both impressive and unsettling. Captain Thorne then did something that shocked everyone present even more than his binding of Pemberton. He approached Eleanor and offered her a respectful bow. "Miss Ashford," he said formally, "I regret that you have suffered such treatment while under the supposed protection of civilized men. If you are agreeable, I would like to offer you passage to a port where you might find more suitable employment that comes without the requirement of enduring abuse." Eleanor stared at him in amazement. A pirate captain was offering her protection and assistance, treating her with more respect and courtesy than any gentleman she had encountered. It defied everything she had been taught about the natural order of the world. "Thank you, Captain," she managed. "But surely you don't mean to help you?" He smiled, and for the first time it reached his eyes, transforming his harsh features. "Miss Ashford, pirates may be lawless, but we are not without honor, at least not all of us." And as the afternoon sun beat down on the tired and miserable Pemberton, Eleanor began to realize that perhaps the most dangerous man in the Caribbean might also be the most honorable she had ever met. Chapter 3. Unexpected Sanctuary. The Crimson Revenge was unlike any ship Eleanor had ever seen. While most vessels she had travelled on were cramped and poorly ventilated, the pirate ship was surprisingly well organized and clean. Captain Thorne had given her his own cabin while he moved to smaller quarters, an act of gallantry that had raised eyebrows among his crew, but went unquestioned given their captain's dangerous mood. Eleanor sat at the captain's desk, staring out the stern windows at the wake trailing behind them. 3 days had passed since they had left the Lady Margaret at Port Royal, along with the other passengers, including a thoroughly chastened Mr. Pemberton, who had been released with stern warnings about his future conduct. The captain had kept his word about finding her suitable employment, but the reality was proving more complex than either of them had anticipated. A knock at the cabin door interrupted her brooding. "Come in," she called. Captain Thorne entered, bearing a tray with tea and ship's biscuits. The domestic gesture seemed oddly out of place, coming from a man whose reputation could silence a tavern full of cutthroats. "I thought you might be hungry," he said, setting the tray on the desk. "Cook managed to acquire some decent tea at our last port." "Thank you, Captain. That's very thoughtful." Eleanor poured tea for both of them, noting how he waited for her to be seated before taking his own chair. His manners, when he chose to employ them, were those of a gentleman born. "Have you given any more consideration to the positions we discussed?" he asked. Eleanor sighed. They had spent the previous evening reviewing the possibilities. A plantation owner in Barbados needed a governess and had vouched for his good character through intermediaries. A merchant family in Port-au-Prince sought someone to educate their daughters. Both positions offered decent wages and respectable situations. "They all seem suitable," Eleanor said carefully. "I'm grateful for your assistance in arranging them. It's more than I had any right to expect." "You speak as if I'm doing you a favor," Captain Thorne observed, when in truth any family would be fortunate to engage someone of your education and character. Eleanor looked at him curiously. How do you know anything about my education or character? We've known each other less than a week. He was quiet for a moment, turning his teacup in his hands. You face danger with courage rather than hysteria. You speak 3 languages fluently. I heard you translating for the French passengers during the crossing. You read Marcus Aurelius for pleasure. He gestured to the book she had left open on his desk, and when a man twice your size brutalized you, you bore it with dignity rather than cringing submission or hysterical demands for revenge. You've been watching me very closely, Eleanor said, not sure whether to be flattered or concerned. I make it my business to understand the people aboard my ship. His grey eyes met hers steadily. In your case, I find myself curious. You're not what I expected when I first saw a governess among the passengers. And what did you expect? A mousy spinster, perhaps. Someone defeated by life, grateful for whatever scraps of respect she might receive. He leaned back in his chair, studying her. Instead, I find a woman of considerable spirit who simply lacks opportunity to show it. Eleanor felt heat rise in her cheeks at his frank assessment. Captain Thorne, may I ask you something? Of course. Why did you help me? Pirates are not known for their chivalrous behavior toward captured passengers, yet you risked your reputation among your crew to punish Mr. Pemberton and assist me. Why? The question seemed to give him pause. He rose and moved to the windows, his hands clasped behind his back as he gazed out at the endless blue of the Caribbean. Tell me, Miss Ashford, what do you know of my history? Only what everyone knows? That you're called Black Hawk? That you've never lost a battle? And that you follow some sort of code that sets you apart from other pirates? He nodded slowly. The code exists because I learned early that without rules, men become animals. I've seen what happens when the strong prey upon the weak without consequence. His voice grew quiet. My sister was much like you once, educated, spirited, trusting in the protection of civilized society. She was 19 when she married a plantation owner in Virginia, a man of impeccable reputation and vast wealth. Eleanor's breath caught as she began to understand. He was charming during their courtship, Captain Thorne continued. After the wedding, he showed his true nature. She endured 3 years of brutality before she died of injuries he claimed came from a fall downstairs. I'm so sorry, Eleanor whispered. He turned back to face her. I was serving in His Majesty's Navy then, a lieutenant with a promising career. When I learned what had truly happened to Mercy, I challenged her husband to a duel. He refused, hiding behind his social position. So I took matters into my own hands. What did you do? I killed him, he said simply. Not in an honorable duel, but with my bare hands like the animal he was. Then I stole his fastest ship and sailed away to become the very thing the Royal Navy had trained me to fight. Eleanor stared at him, seeing the man in an entirely new light. You became a pirate to escape justice for avenging your sister. I became a pirate because I learned that there is no justice in civilized society for men like Pemberton. The strong do as they will, and the weak suffer what they must, unless someone with the power to act chooses to intervene. And you chose to intervene for me. I did. He moved closer, his expression intense. Because no woman should endure what you endured, and because... He stopped, seeming to struggle with words. Because when I look at you, I see what my sister might have become if she had lived. I see courage and dignity and spirit that no amount of abuse has broken, and I find myself wanting to protect that, to nurture it, to... He ran a hand through his dark hair, looking frustrated. Miss Ashford, I fear I'm not expressing myself clearly. Eleanor rose from her chair and moved to stand before him. For the first time since their acquaintance began, she truly looked at him, not as the fearsome pirate captain, but as a man carrying grief and guilt and a desperate need to make amends for what he could not prevent. "Captain Thorne," she said softly, "are you asking me to stay?" The question hung in the air between them, fraught with implications that neither had fully considered until this moment. "Would that be so impossible?" he asked. "You could teach the crew to read and write. Many of them never had the chance to learn. You could help me establish schools in the ports we visit. You could." He paused, then spoke with quiet honesty. "You could help me become a better man than I have been." Eleanor felt her world shift beneath her feet. Here was an offer unlike any she had ever received. Not just employment, but partnership. Not just protection, but purpose. "And what would I be if I stayed?" she asked. "Your mistress? Your what?" "Whatever you chose to be," he said firmly. "I would ask nothing of you that you did not freely give. You would have your own quarters, your independence, your dignity, but you would also have something that no other position could offer you. Which is the freedom to be yourself without compromise or apology." Eleanor looked into his grey eyes and saw something she had never expected to find: genuine respect, admiration, and the stirring of something deeper. The notorious Black Hawk was offering her not just sanctuary, but a chance to build something meaningful with a man who saw her true worth. "Captain," she said quietly, "I think I would like that very much." Chapter 4. The Pirate's Redemption. 6 months later, the Crimson Revenge had become something unprecedented in the Caribbean, a pirate vessel that operated by a code of honor that extended beyond its own crew. Under Eleanor's guidance, Captain Thorne had established a network of schools in port towns throughout the West Indies. Funded by the gold they took from ships engaged in the slave trade or carrying cargo obtained through the exploitation of enslaved labor. Eleanor had indeed become the ship's teacher, but her role had evolved into something far more significant. She was Nathaniel's advisor, his conscience, and increasingly his closest companion. The crew, initially skeptical of having a woman aboard, had come to regard her with protective affection. She had bandaged their wounds, written letters to their families, and helped several learn to read well enough to navigate by the stars. On this particular morning, Eleanor stood at the ship's rail, watching the sun rise over the waters near Tortuga. She wore practical clothes now: breeches, boots, and a linen shirt that scandalized proper society but made perfect sense aboard a sailing ship. Her hair was braided back in a style that kept it secure in strong winds, and her skin had taken on a golden hue from months under the Caribbean sun. "You're up early." Nathaniel's voice came from behind her. She turned to see him approaching with 2 cups of coffee, a morning ritual they had developed over the months of sailing together. "I couldn't sleep," she admitted, accepting the cup gratefully. "I keep thinking about the message we received yesterday." The message had come from a contact in Kingston. Mr. Pemberton had returned to Jamaica and was seeking to bring charges against Captain Thorne for piracy and kidnapping. He had convinced several colonial officials that Eleanor was being held against her will by the notorious Black Hawk. "Having second thoughts about your choice to stay?" Nathaniel asked. Though his tone was light, she could see the concern in his eyes. "Not at all," Eleanor said firmly. "I was thinking about how to handle the situation. We both know Pemberton won't give up easily. He's humiliated and angry, and he has the resources to cause us serious trouble." "I could simply kill him," Nathaniel offered with dark humor. "It would solve the problem permanently." "And make you no better than he is," Eleanor replied. "Besides, I have a better idea. Over the past months, Eleanor had proven herself to be remarkably clever at solving the complex problems that arose from their unconventional life. Nathaniel had learned to trust her judgment implicitly. "I'm listening," he said. "We give the colonial authorities exactly what they're asking for, proof that I'm here of my own free will and that you're not the monster they believe you to be." "And how do you propose we do that?" Eleanor smiled, the expression transforming her face with mischievous beauty. "We get married, Captain, in full view of Kingston society, with the colonial governor himself presiding if possible." Nathaniel nearly choked on his coffee. "Married?" "Think about it," Eleanor continued, warming to her theme. "What better proof that I'm here willingly than choosing to marry you publicly? And what better way to thumb our nose at Pemberton and his accusations?" "Eleanor," Nathaniel said carefully, "marriage is not a game. It's not something to enter into lightly for the sake of making a point." She turned to face him fully, her green eyes serious despite her smile. "Who says I'm not serious about it?" The words hung between them in the warm morning air. Over the months of working together, of sharing dangers and victories, of long conversations under starlit skies, something deep and genuine had grown between them. Neither had spoken of it directly, but both felt it, a connection that went far beyond gratitude or convenience. "Eleanor," Nathaniel said softly, "are you saying you would marry me? Not to solve a problem or make a statement, but because you want to?" "I'm saying," she replied, stepping closer to him, "that somewhere between watching you establish schools for children who would otherwise never learn to read, and seeing you risk your life to help a cargo ship full of freed slaves reach safety, and witnessing you show kindness to every member of this crew, regardless of their past. Somewhere in all of that, the notorious pirate captain became the best man I've ever known. I'm still a pirate, Eleanor. I still steal from ships and fight naval vessels. I'm still wanted by every civilized government in the world. And I'm still a governess, from a modest family with no dowry and no prospects beyond caring for other people's children. We're both exactly what we choose to be, Nathaniel. And I choose to be the wife of a man who sees injustice and fights it, who protects the weak and gives hope to the hopeless." Nathaniel set down his coffee cup and took her hands in his. They were no longer the soft white hands of a sheltered governess. They were tanned and capable, marked by the practical work of life aboard a working ship. But they were still beautiful to him, still gentle when they tended wounds or taught children their letters. "Miss Eleanor Ashford," he said with mock formality, "would you do me the very great honor of becoming Mrs. Eleanor Thorne, wife to a reformed pirate and partner in our mission to bring a little justice to an unjust world?" "Captain Thorne," she replied with equal ceremony, "I would be delighted to accept your proposal." He kissed her then, as the sun painted the Caribbean sky in shades of gold and rose, while the crew of the Crimson Revenge cheered from the rigging above. It was not a union that would be recognized in London drawing rooms or celebrated in society papers, but it was based on something far more solid than social approval: mutual respect, shared purpose, and love born of truly knowing and accepting each other. 3 weeks later, Eleanor Ashford married Captain Nathaniel Thorne in the cathedral at Kingston, with half the crew of the Crimson Revenge in attendance wearing their finest clothes and trying to look respectable. The colonial governor himself performed the ceremony, partly out of curiosity and partly because the couple had arrived with a substantial donation to the local orphanage. Mr. Pemberton, present in the congregation by invitation, watched in fury as his former victim stood radiant in borrowed silk, publicly choosing to wed the man he had tried to paint as her captor. When Eleanor caught his eye during the ceremony, she smiled sweetly and mouthed, "Thank you," for if he had not shown her the true nature of so-called civilized men, she might never have been able to appreciate the honor of the pirate who had proved himself worthy of her love. The marriage of the notorious Black Hawk to the mysterious Governess became legend throughout the Caribbean, A tale of love, conquering social barriers, and proving that sometimes the most dangerous man in the world could also be the most honorable. And if ships carrying slave traders occasionally found themselves relieved of their human cargo and their gold by a pirate captain whose wife taught the freed slaves to read, well, that was simply the price of doing such despicable business in waters patrolled by a man who had learned that true strength meant protecting those who could not protect themselves.